the open agenda, and we will work through them one by one, starting off with the Napier Youth Council request around an increase to $10,000 to their youth development grant. That's an extra $6,600 per annum. So we have a recommendation to increase to 5,000, so it's an extra 1,600, and open up for discussion. Anyone have any particularly strong views? Deputy Mayor Brosnan?
I'll give them their 10.
I agree with Councillor Brosnan.
Are they watching?
And so so the source will be a transfer from the Community Development Projects grants, and then annual adjustments through the LTP budgets from next year.
I was going to suggest, could we trial it for a year with possibly some funding coming from one of the recovery budgets, being that it's promoting youth development?
So I guess checking in with our recovery working group lead, Richard or Natasha may be able to comment on whether it would fit with the criteria of one of our recovery funds.
Through the Mayor, I'd just like to respond to the suggestion to fully fund it through the community development grants, and that would actually be around about 10% of the community development grants. It's quite a low funding allocation, so I'll pass to Richard to talk about the recovery fund.
Possibly. I don't know. I'd probably have to go through the evaluation, which we haven't done, but it possibly could.
I'm struggling a little bit to see how it would fit the criteria for the recovery fund. It's recognition of youth achievements, so it's not around economic stimulus. So I don't think it would meet that criteria personally. Can I make a suggestion that rather than increasing to the full 10,000, we increase to 7,000, with that coming from the Community Development Projects grant?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I wondered too, though, whether we could seek some policy development from the youth councillors to their criteria for making the grants. They were quite unclear during their submission yesterday about their basis for making grants, and I think it would be fair for them to make further submission next time if they want an increased grant, to have a good policy around how they would make such grants or the criteria for such grants.
Mm-hmm.
Through the Mayor, so in the past they have been guided by our contracted service around their recommendations, and those recommendations do come to council officers to monitor and just check in and see whether they fit with the criteria of the fund. However, this year we've been talking with the Youth Council to do exactly that, to determine their priorities each year rather than on the day, and that will assist them with their grant making, and also they'll be able to get their recommendations through very seamlessly. In terms of the amount, just so you're aware, $5,000, we've done a little bit of looking at other councils and what they provide. $5,000 is generous in terms of what other councils provide, but I'm sure the Youth Council would be very positive about receiving closer to the $10,000, as you are well aware. But the idea of piloting $7,000 could be a really good option, with maybe their experience and review of how that went and how they allocated that coming back to council for future bids.
Yep. Councillor Wright.
Yeah, I'd be prepared to support going up to 7, but I was interested that they were talking about the grants being quite low, so it was more like, to me, a recognition thing rather than something that was genuinely going to support someone further their career or their academic career or anything. And for me, I'd prefer that they gave less grants, they were more targeted and they were bigger in number, so they actually were useful to the person receiving them. But that's my personal view, but I would like that sort of flagged, that's how I feel.
Yes, so through the Mayor, we have discussed about whether you give more smaller grants or provide a couple of grants at a higher level, and they're quite keen to explore how they allocate with some rationale behind that.
Thank you.
Councillor Crystal.
When I asked them yesterday, they said one of the things they were looking to fund was kids going to Outward Bound. Now, as an ex-Outward Bounder myself, I still value it as one of the best things I've ever done in my life, and I totally support that. It costs about $4,000 to go there, so anything that you can get through funding is certainly a positive thing for our youth.
Through the Mayor, so they have allocated funding to Outward Bound in the past. Yeah.
Great. Councillor Bogue.
Yes, I support increasing the funding. I mean, it seems such a tiny little amount, you know, in the big picture of things. And I don't recall, maybe my memory is not as good as it used to be, but I don't recall a youth council making submissions to us before. They seem to be a very proactive and well-organised and articulate group. And I just think this would be, you know, a pat on the back to them for what they're doing. And of course, it's not for themselves; it's for others that they want it. So, yes, I support the $7,000, and perhaps some suggestion that if that's a successful strategies they use or criteria or whatever, we could look at $10,000 next year for the LTP without any promises, but make it contingent upon how well they utilise the funds they're given this year.
Thank you. Councillor McGrath.
It's through the chair. Just recognising that this council is making changes to start listening to youth. I think we're around about $120 million a year council. So when you start talking $5, $7, $10 million, not sure how much voice that we're asking for, but we are child friendly, and I guess I challenge the council to go away with perhaps the 7,000 and try and talk us up next year as to why and how they can better utilise more money.
Councillor Crown.
Through the chair, I absolutely agree with Councillor McGrath's comments. I support us awarding more money for the Youth Council, but I'd also like to see more involvement from them. If they're coming to us for more, I feel like there's a real opportunity for us to grow a really genuine partnership with them in order to make sure that Napier's youth voice is heard at a governance level within our city. So I think that the challenge that Councillor McGrath has suggested is a really good one, for them to come back to us with to show that they've used the money wisely and with some ideas of how they can better inform our decision making with Napier's youth voice.
Okay, so I'm hearing that there is support for an increase to $7,000, and that will come from the Community Development Projects grants. That alongside that, we would like them to actually provide us with some further information around what they actually intend to use those funds for and what the criteria is for awarding grants. I'm sure we can put some better words around it than that.
Maxine.
If we could have the... Thank you.
Can I suggest the wording could be that they come back to council with their funding allocation policy?
Perfect.
Through you, Your Worship.
Yes?
So just some clarity, please, Natasha, although I did hear them yesterday. What I'm sort of picking up is that the current expression of the Youth Council is to use this increase towards the awards. Is that their sole focus, or are there other areas of capacity that they'd like to invest in?
Through the Mayor, so this is primarily for the Youth Awards, which are grants to individual young people that apply. There is other funding that we provide for them to complete other activities such as events and campaigns, etc.
Thank you.
Is everybody happy with the recommendation as written?
Youth grants. Oh, yes, sorry, Community Development Projects Fund.
Okay.
Another question of clarity.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I look at this, in a year's time when the Youth Council comes back to us, because there was an expression around, they've asked for 10, we're giving them 7, along with an opportunity to become more familiar with the processes of applying to council for extensions in those budgets, which is part of their capacity building. So when they come back to us in a year's time, will it still be $7,000 for the awards and a plan of activities or capability investment around $3,000? Or are they looking to use the $7,000 to understand their capacity and desire at the moment, and there's an expectation when they come to us at the LTP that they'll have a better definition that might cost closer to 10?
Through the Mayor, so the $7,000 will be for the Youth Awards, and as I understand it, that they come back with a clear rationale if they wanted to increase that allocation to $10,000 for Youth Awards.
Okay, thank you.
Which would, be part of their submission for next
the
year.
LTP.
For the LTP. Very good. We shall move to the next request from Sport Hawke's Bay, which we currently fund $24,500 per annum, and they have asked for an additional $80,000 to fund predominantly some cycling programs and also some disability and inclusion activities. So again, I open up for discussion. Councillor Price.
Just a question. I was of the impression we gave them other grants as well, like an Highways grant. Do they still exist? Because we used to give them more than 24,000, but it was under other grants.
Through the Mayor, so we have provided through other funding schemes one-off grants for specific projects, and this council also supported an Activate Maraenui 3-year program a few years ago. So their $24,000 is their service agreement, which is reviewed every 3 years, where they can propose for additional funding for additional services, and that's looked at as a process with all of the service agreements, so it's in line with the LTP, but this is outside of that process.
So just further to that, when did we last give them an Highways grant? Or how was that staged?
Through the Mayor, I'm unaware of the Highways grant that we provided them. Don't know if it might be infrastructure.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I believe that was probably part of the transport program funding, but I don't have the detail to answer that right now. Perhaps I can inquire with staff and come back to you on that.
Just further, I'm not saying we should be giving them $80,000, but we seem to have cut them these other grants that they haven't been getting, and I think they're worth more than $24,000.
Through the Mayor, so you did provide a $20,000 grant last year through the annual plan for specific projects.
So is this not for a specific project too?
They're seeking $80,000 per annum, so it's to increase their operational grant for some specific outcomes.
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair, I'm just a little bit confused about the numbers, because in
I
the
know.
submission on page 463 in the attachments, they indicate that they were seeking 105,000. Previously, they'd received 93,000, and then they went through and justified some smaller figures for 25,000, 10,000, and 70,000, and I couldn't correlate that with the sheet here. So I'm just a little bit confused about what they have applied for, and how we've ended up with $80,000 compared with what they've applied for and what we're going to offer them.
Yes, it is confusing. So we have essentially, and I don't
And I
quite
had
know
a head
where.
cold.
Yeah, I don't quite know where they've got the figures in their report from, but we have the service level agreement for the ongoing funding has been at the level of $24,500.
So is that separate to this 80,000?
Yes.
Okay.
So the 105,000 is the existing 25,000, and then they've asked for an additional 80,000. But I agree, it's confusing in their submission where they're tending to suggest that we're already giving them 93,000, which we're not. so yes, I agree, it's confusing.
That's why I wonder whether we're at 24, there was other bits and pieces.
We do, yeah, we have done some one-off things over recent years, but there certainly hasn't been anything over and above the 25,000 as in the ongoing service level agreement. So really, it's whether we have an appetite to increase their funding level for that ongoing service level agreement. And that would need to come from our council projects fund. So currently, that fund is $200,000. However, we've already allocated 70,000, so we have 130,000 left for the year. And I was just, while we were talking, trying to do a quick tally of what else we've got in here that would need to come out of that fund. So the Ngātoi $10,000 would need to come from council projects funds. Potentially the youth impact program is one that would need to come from that. So we just need to be cognitive, I guess, that that's really our primary discretionary fund for us. So we want to get our best bang for buck, obviously, and it does need to last through till 30 June next year.
Just in addition, through the Mayor, some of the projects may be able to be allocated from the Community Development Projects Fund, but that would require an application process. So there is some ability to allocate from another source.
And that would apply to the Sport Hawke's Bay?
No, that doesn't really
No.
fit the criteria. But
Yeah.
So what I was suggesting with that in response, if you are supportive of this one, was that you could actually reallocate from the council projects fund, because it doesn't align with that either so
Yeah.
much, if you wanted to provide funding. I think the ongoing nature of it would have to be considered as well, but that could be dealt with through the long-term plan with an increase to the level of funding provided to service agreements overall. And then the Ngātoi could be funded through the arts policy funding as a project potentially, and the youth impact through the Community Development Projects Fund. But that fund has a very low allocation, so that would take all of that fund at that level.
What was that fund, sorry, the community?
The Community Development
Development.
Fund, which you've already allocated some funding through for the Youth Council.
Yeah.
So that has a total funding allocation of 75,000
Okay,
for the year.
thank you. Councillor Price and then Councillor Bogue.
Sorry, just a question. I thought, John may be able to answer this. I thought we were in a partnership with the Iways. And we haven't paid any in for a while.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm just seeking a bit more information to that, and if I could come back to you once I've received that, it'd be appreciated.
Councillor Bogue first, then Councillor Brown, Councillor Tapani.
Yes, I am very supportive of many of the things they're asking for funding for, but I appreciate, we have a limited amount of money to allocate. But in terms of the disability, the $10,000 for the disability matters and projects they're suggesting. I'm wondering if, we do have the Napier Disability Advisory Group, which meets monthly, and we are represented on that. And without fobbing them off, perhaps we could suggest that they meet with the Napier Disability Advisory Group and get their support and come back to us on some of these things, because it would strengthen their case. I mean, it's not going to solve their problems immediately, but it would strengthen the case for these initiatives if they were able to work in partnership and have a joint submission or a joint request for funds, particularly for the disability sector.
Excuse me, through Madam Mayor, they do, Katie, the lady identified that I mentioned earlier, she's actually part of that. She goes to that group.
And just in addition to that, we actually use the Disability Advisory Group to provide us with advice on the disability strategy. They're a partner in the disability strategy. So, in effect, by funding Sport Hawke's Bay to also provide that advice may negate that process.
Okay. Councillor Brown.
This is maybe something I should have asked yesterday, but sort of two questions. Do we know how much Hastings would be putting into this, seeing as it's a Hawke's Bay wide thing? And if we don't fund them, do they have other opportunities for funding? Did they answer that yesterday? No. Okay.
Oh, yeah, they would have opportunities for funding, but couldn't answer the question around Hastings. Councillor Tapani?
I just would like to express my reservations around this particular proposal. One, the confusion leading into it around amounts and how much we contribute and our overall contribution, but also around the increasing number of people who are delivering similar services in this space. And I'm thinking of Sir Avery's new complex and a number of new groups which are looking to hit the same target market and achieve the same good social good results. So I'm wondering whether or not there is a possibility for us to reduce this first instalment. My greatest reservation is around the 3 years and $80,000, and whether or not this is more about achieving longevity rather than accessibility towards our community. I'm aware we've received a number of concerns from the community around particularly access and facilities associated with the delivery of some of these programs. And while that's a concern for Sport Hawke's Bay, as a funder of the group, accessibility is a concern. And so I just wanted to express that reservation. I don't know if we have the opportunity to consider altering how we might approach this, but I would love to see the opportunity for us to engage with Sport Hawke's Bay in a year's time to look at measuring that accessibility quota before we entertain an annual fixed contribution of this level.
Councillor McGrath.
Just a question, are Sport Hawke's Bay the only group out there teaching cycling in schools? I might give the answer to that. Yeah, but he can answer the question.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So without any funding, we may not have that teaching in our city and in our schools.
There are a number of projects which have been outlined in your presentation around activities around schools, reducing the number of cars, project on Napier Hill, and also at Henry Hill Primary School, which has been highly successful. That program is working across Hastings at something I believe around 7 schools, and has been highly successful in reducing the number of vehicles and access our children travel to school. The intention is to build on that. We have in the past, as a council, supported an an iWays coordinator. Many of you will have met Lyndall Johansson, who subsequently left and has gone to NZTA. And probably for the last year or so, Sport Hawke's Bay has been requesting funding to continue that program. And John will probably end up with the information eventually, but we have not contributed for some considerable time to assist with that program. The Bikes in Schools program, highly successful in Hastings, and the intention was to make it grow in Napier. The disability, as was explained yesterday, it's around the disability activity for people in sport and recreation, and there is no Helberg advisor in Hawke's Bay. Their nearest advisor is in Wellington now. There's no sport Paralympics or Special Olympics, and so the advisor that is now working within Sport Hawke's Bay is taking on those roles.
Oh, thank you. So just on that, Your Worship, I'll withdraw my concerns as a result of the information provided by Councillor Taylor. That's given me great context. Thank you.
So just further to that, and sorry, Councillor Taylor, you're sort of becoming our submitter by default, but it's good that you're here to answer our questions. We have funded previously the Bike in Schools programs here in Napier. I can recall Bledisloe School was part of that, and some of the, so, and has that been in a form of one-off annual grants as opposed to being part of the service level agreement?
Yeah, hasn't been part of the service agreement. The service agreement's been in place for nearly 3 years.
Oh, way longer than that.
Oh, I mean this current.
Oh, this current one is the third year of the 3-year cycle.
Those have been like the seed funding, the core funding, and we have funded projects, as Natasha has said. This is about some certainty going forward, and it's not around survival, because the funding of the disability advisor, as was indicated yesterday, is funded from Sport Hawke's Bay reserves. It's not done from anywhere else.
Thank you.
I was just going to basically, Councillor Taylor took the words out of my mouth. I was just going to say exactly, just to put Councillor Tapani at ease.
I'll go to John and then...
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to extrapolate on some of the comments that Councillor Taylor covered, the iWays funding environment is a bit of a tricky thing. So the iWays program was always a 3-year program of work contributed to by NZTA and Napier City, as well as our other regional partners. That deliberate program of work, that 3-year program did finish at the end of the 17-18 financial year. I believe in the 18-19 financial year we did provide funding, but it was more out of existing operational budgets than a dedicated iWays budget. At the point where that dedicated 3-year program finished, we were waiting on the government to release a new government policy statement on transportation and identify a way forward on all things cycling and other user related, and how that might influence iWays. So beyond that 3-year program, there was no specific allowance made by either us or NZTA about a continuation of that. That's obviously not helpful for that program, but that's where we ended up. And as Graham's mentioned, Linda was a great advocate for that program of work. And while we were able to continue providing funding for an additional year, that's outside of our program at this current point in time. I think our funding for that was around 70 grand a year. I am still waiting for that feedback from staff that I nipped into the room to ask for, but that's just covering off on the iWays stuff.
Thank you. Councillor Price, did you have some?
I just wanted to clarify after Councillor Tapani where Sport Hawke's Bay and Sport New Zealand sit in New Zealand. Sport Hawke's Bay, through the COVID, they've given out about $750,000 around Hawke's Bay. They're different to Graham Avery's outfit. They're there, and they were trusted this money to give out to sports clubs and other clubs. So they are quite a big part of it that's part of us. Thank you.
So I'd like to make the suggestion that I'm hesitant to make a drastic change to the service level agreement funding at this point in time, and I would welcome the opportunity to meet with Sport Hawke's Bay outside of the annual plan process in the lead up to next year's long-term plan to have a more detailed conversation about what that may look like going forward from the long-term plan. I would, personally, I know that there's huge value in the Bike in Schools program, and I would consider giving, again, a one-off grant for the year, which presumably would need to come from our council projects fund to support the continuation or the reintroduction of that program through some of our local schools. And again, probably don't have a good handle on what that cost may well be. Do you know that level of detail, Councillor Taylor? No.
Could I make a suggestion through the Mayor that they could provide that additional level of detail through an application to the Council Projects Fund, because that is open all year until it's spent.
Yep.
If that's what you are seeking.
Perfect. Is everybody happy with that recommendation? So essentially that we continue with the current level of funding for the civil service level agreement and we'll meet with Sport Hawke's Bay to review that in the lead up to the long-term plan. Great, and yes, that a one-off grant be considered for the Bike in Schools program following an application to the Community Development, to the Council Projects Fund.
Correct, yep.
Councillor Price?
It's an outstanding idea because I think it needs to be tidied up because one-off grants get confused with yearly grants. And they're certainly in that state when you read all the figures. So, yeah, great idea. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
It's more general. Would we be able to get, just for clarity in terms of how much money we've got available here, we've got the Community Development Projects Fund, we've got a total of 75k, and
of which we've allocated 7,000 to the Youth Council.
And how much is in the Council Projects Fund?
130,000.
And so far allocated?
No, that's what's left. We've allocated 70 already. The total fund is 200.
Okay. And this 25,200? Oh, brilliant. That's what I was looking for. It's in the box. Cool. Amazing. What page are we on?
Next one.
Good idea.
So
Yes, please.
the current funding, does that come out of this fund or somewhere else?
No, that's in our base operational budgets.
So the Community Development Grant says 75,000 allocation.
And this 25 then, is that coming out of that 130?
Oh, Projects Fund is 130,000. ComDev, which is a separate application, has 75 less the Youth Council.
7,000 is such a tricky number, isn't it? Would have been so much easier rounded up.
And do service level agreements, do they come out of a completely different budget or one of these funds?
No, completely different. That's within our base operational budgets.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to the Blowcart submission requesting $30,000 for an extension to their track. And there is a suggestion here that that could come from the Recovery Fund, which when I first looked at that, I thought it was a long stretch, but I've been contemplating it while we're sitting here. And I think in terms of the various offerings that they could in developing tourist opportunities and things like that, it does actually, in my opinion, sit quite well within the Recovery Fund. Richard, would you mind just giving us an update on, and I know I read it just in the last day or so, but now I can't remember the figures. So the $500,000 and we've allocated is about 178,000 or something at the moment.
I'll have to find that out.
Yeah.
You know, so put me on the spot there.
Sorry.
I was just wondering with that project, as well as how that fits into the broader ambitions for the Lagoon Farm. And I wonder if you do want to go down the path of granting that we do have some caveats around how that needs to, because they were a temporary, there's a few things in there that they were a temporary facility really on a short-term lease, and there needs to be a few things resolved in order for them to, get certainty, I guess, of what they're doing, but equally that council is aware of how big they're going to get and what's going to happen.
And I guess I'm also signalling that it's not an automatic allocation out of the recovery fund here. We would actually be advising them to apply through the proper process, and perhaps we could ask for them in that application to provide that information that you've just outlined.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So I have, sorry to interrupt you, Worship. So I have the same concerns as expressed by Richard. So my concerns were it was a temporary location when they first came to council, and the proposal that sits on the table now seems to indicate that they're not looking for an alternative site, but looking to expand their footprint on that site. They've highlighted trees which were there before they got there that have been there nearly 80 years, and they're suggesting that perhaps those trees should go. On top of that, as Richard's already indicated, we have the regional park. We've got some stormwater development to do in that area. NZTA has indicated a level 2 change for that intersection, which will impinge upon the space that they've got there. There's a whole lot of activities happening on that corner, and when they first came to us, it was, as Richard indicated, a temporary location while they look for something more permanent. And I'm sensing in this application that they're moving away from temporary and hoping to secure something more permanent. I may be wrong, but that's what I'm reading in the application, and I think there are some significant concerns around our long-term plans in that space, as Richard has indicated.
Okay, so if we actually make the recommendation that they apply to the recovery fund, and how would we like to word what, and council officers will provide us with some guidance as to the information that we will request or require as part of that application in order to assess the long-term impacts of them staying at that site, or whether they're still looking for another site. That was very garbled.
Yes, I think if we have some wording around that, the council officers will help them form the application. And John recalls about 160. We did
receive an email recently, I think, which is what the mayor's referring to, on how much of that fund had already been allocated, and it was in that ballpark.
So there's still funds available.
Still got 300 odd thousand. Great.
Could we just add perhaps that an application be made to the recovery fund which includes their long-term strategic plan?
Yep, and council officers will work with them on that.
Just a couple of thoughts, because they're very shovel-ready. Can we assist them perhaps to getting some government money? Get some shovel-ready money? Can we have that conversation with them, or...?
If there is still the ability to apply for shovel-ready projects, which is my understanding there's not.
Our COVID response money.
And just, I know we're very protective of trees, but I'm sure those trees were planted a very long time ago for a set purpose. We may actually find out now that they're the wrong trees in the wrong place, and there's always good demand for firewood as a fundraiser.
Have it as another matter
And they are.
outside of funding.
Okay, so I'll just draw your attention to the wording that our fabulous governance team has pulled together up there, and I'm very happy with that. If anyone else have any further input they'd like?
One more, if I may, Your Worship.
Yep.
Absolutely agree with how the blow carts can add a sense of diversity to the offerings of Napier, and looking at our local tourism, that's hugely beneficial. But I note that at $25 a go, plus membership if you wanted to join the club, that's a level of discretionary spending that not every family in Napier has the ability to express in that space. And so the other thing I'd love for our staff to perhaps quantify, whether for my benefit or others, is that public good factor around the 30,000 plus another 30,000 going into this club, and that based on the fee to use their service, that doesn't open it up to all of our city, and whether or not accessibility is a concern in their strategic plan, or am I being too harsh?
No, I think my recollection of yesterday, their presentation, they did touch on a have-a-go model where people essentially were making just a donation of some description alongside that that other fixed fee, I think, which was probably more corporate-based and, yeah.
Okay, thank you, I missed that.
Through you, Madam.
I'll just, Richard at the back and then Councillor Mawson.
I just suggest that we have that they are invited to make an application.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Councillor Mawson?
It was just clarification around the cost. It was $25 for half an hour, which I feel is extremely good value.
Okay, there being no further discussion, we'll move on to the Napier Civic Choir. So we have been providing funding for the Napier Civic Choir, $20,000, which covered a 3-year timeframe, is my understanding, and that is up until June of next year. Okay, so, and they're requesting an additional 10,000, and that will be as, so they'll be needing another 3-year service level agreement. Is that what it will be through part of the long-term plan process?
Through the Mayor, so they don't have a service agreement with us currently. That funding was allocated from the Council Projects Fund at its initiation, I believe, one of the first applications to the fund, with the view that a service agreement may be entered into when that funding was completed. So that would be part of the process of the long-term plan in allocating that funding to the service agreement pot to cover that. So there is an increase on the $10,000 versus $7,000 per year.
Okay, great. So can I just, I think then perhaps the first part to note in here is that we advise them to approach us as part of the long-term plan process to discuss negotiating a service level agreement.
I think it's fair to say that we made the undertaking that we would consider them for a service agreement in the next round, which is through the long-term plan. We probably just need to make sure we've got allocation for that in the long-term plan, as we have given them that indication already.
Okay, so it's really just that we'll update them that the service level agreement will be brought through as part of the long-term plan.
Yes, and they'll just have to do a proposal just like everybody else in that round.
Okay. And that we would be seeking a proposal from them for that.
Council invites them to? Does Mother invite them to?
Again, just words, isn't it?
Excellent.
Just coming back to you, Natasha, I'm just wondering, is the wording of that strong enough? Because that, if we have essentially already made a commitment, it's not that we'll be considering it, it's that we have actually committed to have that discussion with them.
Correct, yes. Yeah.
Yep, we know you're there. Just trying to get the wording right on this part of it, Councillor Boak, and then we'll. It's more that we'll honour the commitment, that there's already been a commitment made.
Include rather than including.
Very good. Right, so Councillor Bogue.
Yes, just looking at their accounts, I see a large chunk of their income and their revenue comes from gaming trusts. 28,000 from pub charity, this was last year, 23 from the One Foundation, etc., etc. Now, there are quite a lot of organisations such as these which rely on gaming trusts and also are fueled by, almost totally by volunteer activity that have been hit hard by COVID. And I'm wondering if such organisations whose funding stream has suffered quite dramatically and drastically from the COVID and the reduction of gaming grants would be eligible to apply for some supplementary funding through our recovery funds.
Very good question.
Through the Mayor, that's not part of the criteria for the recovery fund to supplement income that is no longer available through gaming trusts.
Okay, thank you.
Well, if I can just say something, I think we should take that into consideration. I can't quite read what's up there, but are we not supplementing their? We're not supplementing their grant from us at all. Is that?
So that was what I was just about to move on to, Councillor Bogue, in terms of what additional support we may give them in this current annual plan. So I just wanted to deal with the future more permanent agreement that we'd enter into with them, and now opening it up for people's view. So essentially they've got $7,000 as part of the existing agreement for the current annual plan, and they're basically wanting $10,000 a year. So I read that as saying that there's a request for an additional $3,000 through to the end of this current financial year, which personally I'm very happy to support that.
Me too.
Yep. And that would be coming from, well, it could either come from the community development or it could... Oh, the arts policy, yes, you mentioned that one. How much is in that one?
Yeah.
50.
To find some arty youth councillors.
What's left?
Isn't the youth council?
Let's go 40, yeah.
Well, there's some artists on the youth council, we can start rounding up.
Employee as well.
Yeah. Toy. Yeah. Okay, and so the second bullet point then to put here is that an additional allocation of $3,000 funding be given this year from the Arts Policy Fund. Any further discussion before we move on?
Can we just make that allocation rather than fund? It's not a funding scheme itself. Thank you.
Paramai Residents Association for the county. Oh, we're a county drain. Oh, and sorry, before we do that, there's just been a request from Councillor Mawson to just quickly touch back on the Sport Hawke's Bay application.
Yeah, sorry, through your worship. One thing we didn't sort of note there was they did actually ask $10,000 for that disability position, and we kind of moved past that. I do feel that's quite a valuable position. So their current funding wouldn't have allocated for that, seeing as it is a new position. So I felt if we could sort of see what the feeling was to actually add that in there, as opposed to just including that in the fund application as a one-off for the cycling.
Okay, so if I can just seek some clarification, because what I heard from Councillor Taylor was that position was already, that resource was already funded from reserves.
Funded from reserves, which they obviously aren't
Which are
replenishing.
running out, is that what it is? So therefore they need some, okay. So I'll open that up for discussion as to, because and again, you're suggesting that we should be considering that as a permanent yearly increase to their service level agreement, or as a temporary thing until we enter into renegotiation of
Well,
their...
certainly to supply them with some sort of backing this year, I guess,
Mhm.
and obviously have them apply again, if necessary, next year.
Similar to what you've done with the choir, so we
Yeah.
get them through and then we get it all lined up.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Councillor McGrath?
Sorry, just some confusion. Is this role different from what the disabilities group are providing?
Yes.
Natasha?
So as identified by Councillor Taylor, it's a newly established role, and it's kind of in between. So as mentioned, even in their submission, they've got Halberg and Wellington and so forth. So it's been identified that there's no one doing this from an active position, as in activity, getting people active in the disability sector. So it's definitely no one else is doing that.
Just to clarify through the Mayor, so the Sport Hawke's Bay Disability Advisor is part of the Napier Disability Advisory Group who provide advice and support to Council's disability strategy.
I'd support including the 10,000 for the disability advisory services. I've seen the work that the Holberg Trust do in other city centres, and it's an amazing service and really important for the families of. I used to volunteer with kids with disabilities, and helping them get into sports was a huge relief for the family, and the joy on the kids' faces was pretty impressive. So it's definitely a magical experience.
Councillor Cram.
Through you, Madam Mayor, our disability strategy that we have, is there a time period attached to that strategy at the moment?
Through the Mayor, so it's a 3-year strategy, and we have an annual implementation plan, which we're developing the first one at the moment.
Okay, so sorry, just clarification to get this straight in my head. Sorry, it feels like it's been quite a long day. As per Councillor Price's suggestion, so we're looking to sort of tide them over until we're able to have the discussions around their service level agreement in relation to our next long-term plan period, and then would we be looking to build that role into the service level agreement ongoing? Is that correct? Is that what we're saying?
Through the Mayor, so every organisation that has a service level agreement is able to propose every 3 years what they would like to do. Just want to point out that the disability strategy is the council's provision of our services and facilities in an accessible way for people with disabilities. It does not support other organisations' disability services. So while we really appreciate the advice and the work that happens out there in those organisations, that's not the strategy's intention. So certainly their work contributes to a Napier that is for everyone, but the strategy is about how council provides its own services and facilities.
Okay, thank you.
So what we have on the table is a $10,000 one-off allocation this year from the Council Projects Fund to support the disability and inclusion resource with a view to Sport Hawke's Bay.
Yeah.
One more. Kirsten?
Councillor Crown.
Through you, Madam Mayor. By allocating the $10,000 from this fund, it doesn't impinge on our ability to implement or give effect to the actions that we have put in our disability strategy. It simply strengthens it. Would that be fair to say?
Through the Mayor, so any support that we receive from other organisations that assist us to implement our own strategy are good. I wouldn't say that this would be a direct contribution because it sits outside of what the strategy is intended. However, the resource is good for Napier.
I just think it's important for people to understand where a disability advisor sits within the sports framework, because what Natasha is talking about is a council strategy for disability in Napier City, in the footpaths, pedestrian crossings, all of those sorts of things. And there are a number of organisations throughout New Zealand where there is the intention to keep or enable people with disabilities to participate in sport and recreation. The Helberg Trust has done it, and Parafed, Paralympics, Special Olympics, all of those organisations deal with people with particular types of disability and enabling them to be included in society. So they do have quite a significant difference. And the advisor that Sport Hawke's Bay is looking or has already put in place, using their own reserves, is to provide that service for all of those organisations within Hawke's Bay, because they do not have individual representation here.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. That's really useful. So further to that, and this is still open for discussion, this isn't the final landing, but I'm just trying to get some words up there. So further to that consideration of an increase in the service level agreement to fund this position will be considered as part of the long-term plan. And it could be a separate bullet point. Thank you. Councillor Bogue.
Yes, with the one-off allocation, could we ask, and I'm not trying to be parochial here, but it is Sport Hawke's Bay and we are Napier, and it's our Napier ratepayers' money. Can we ask that the focus be on Napier projects?
It's funding an position, a resource, an employee who I would assume is working across the whole of Hawke's Bay.
We're only part funding.
Yeah, so we're part funding it, and I'm sure they've made a similar application to Hastings, and so that position, that role would be operating across the whole of Hawke's Bay.
Including Wairau, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, if we could bring the wording back up and we'll just have a final review of that, and if everyone's happy, we will move on to the next.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bearing in mind as well that when we do come to our final review tomorrow, we will check over all of these as well in case anyone reflects on it overnight and decides that there's changes they'd like to make. We'll finish the funding applications today, but then we've got a whole lot of other things to talk about, Councillor Simpson. Okay, so moving back to the Piramai Residents Association and the Country Drain project, which I think, we have seen this before, and I think we're all very supportive and love the proactive initiative that they've brought to us. We do have some comments here from council officers, and I guess it would probably be worthwhile inviting John just to give us a bit of a rundown on the comments he's provided.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. I'll just remind myself of what I said. So, for the cross-country county drain project, I believe this initiative was presented to the last long-term plan, and I guess the Three Waters specifically position on this hasn't really changed since then, with regard to the fact that our drain or open waterway network is primarily objective is to convey stormwater to final receiving environments in a manner that reduces to the greatest degree possible any flooding risk. Any planting within that environment needs to take account of the hydraulic capacity. So the intention is to use our network model that we have now developed, but are still to calibrate to assess what, if any, wiggle room we have in that capacity for planting. But we also have to have a look at what are the operational requirements for access to that open drain network and allow for that before we can commit to any sort of planting. So we're simply not ready to do that work yet.
Thank you for that. From my perspective, I'm conscious that this is something that they have presented to us a number of years ago now, and I'm just wondering how we can actually engage with them in some way so that they do understand that it's something that we're trying to build into our future planning in some regard, and perhaps it is just a case of explaining to them exactly what you've just said. But the dollar value also, to me, $2.5 million, a question I have is how do we get that into our planning, because it's not something we can fund from any of the funds we have available because it's too much. So it would need to become part of our capital plan within our long-term plan.
Thank you. And certainly, I believe part of the conversation at the last submission was that we have prioritised investment in stormwater and our open space to projects that, in the first instance, drain to the Ahuriri estuary, recognising that's a sensitive receiving environment, and we have quite a bit of work to do in terms of improving the outcomes in that space. And so at that point, not a priority for funding. We could present it as a program item in the long-term plan programs when that's presented and see where that falls in regard to the priority for spend. Also recognising that our master plan work and modelling will identify other needs for capital investment.
Councillor Wright.
This project's pretty awesome, and it looks like it can be broken down into chunks of work as well. And the part that interests me is the cycleway network connections in there. We have a Rotary Pathway Trust organisation that's still in existence, as I understand it hasn't wound up yet. I understand it still has money available in it to do work, and the cycleway part of this project to me would be a perfect fit for that organisation, and could be something that could be actually, once we work out where the pathway can go, that it doesn't interfere with our business, something that could be done quite quickly and start the project off. The connections that they allude to Boys High and from Taradale and everything like that sound like they'd be pretty useful and important to people in the cycling, using the cycling network. So just an idea, but if we could bite it off in chunks and say, well, not what we can't do, but is there things in here that we can start doing, and what other organisations are there out there already that we can get to partner with to do some of it?
Yeah, firstly, I'd just like to seek some clarification from staff because we have received some funding for some cycleways there as part of the shovel-ready projects. So does that funding, that particular project, cover off everything that's within the Putamai Residents Association submission with regards to cycleways, or is that just part of it? And you may not know the answer to that question, I appreciate.
Through you, Madam Mayor, correct. The shovel-ready projects that we have received funding for do include the cross-country drain pathway, and that is moving quite quickly and I believe we're looking to at how we can break that project down to ensure we have funding to do that in reasonably arranged sections. It may be that we can fund the whole of that pathway. At the point where it's a pathway at surface level, those don't tend to impact on access requirements for operations, although depending on the nature of that pathway, where the heavy diggers might impact on the integrity of that pathway. So that's something to think about as we move forward. I am not aware of whether we've looked at the complete application from the association as to how much of that shovel-ready project meets their requirements. It's all moving very quickly, and staff are at or beyond capacity in that regard. When it comes to looking at the things that we can do, it's not just about what funding, capital, or otherwise we have available. It's also about staff time, and on the presumption that they're all working on our top priority projects to enable capacity for us to pick up something like this, we'd have to put something down. So, certainly happy to seek advice or direction on that as to what we stop doing in order to pick something else up.
Councillor Crystal, then Councillor Mawson.
I was just following up on Councillor Wright. I know the Rotary groups are looking for projects for next year. They have significant celebrations and things. And one of the things that they're very good at is planting and natives. So I know they've got quite a lot of money they're looking to invest. So it is worth approaching them for projects like this because it would be a very good fit with them. And I know that what John's saying about obviously needing people to plan it, but if some of the work can be done that doesn't take too much, work alongside the cycleway, that'd certainly be something that they would be interested in, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Just kind of following on from Councillor Crystal, I've heard many times many members from the Putamai Residents Association actually saying if it's an issue with manpower, they're more than happy to help out themselves to plant those trees, give them the trees and they'll plant them. So if they've been given some direction from staff on what that requires and so forth, I'm sure that if it's a manpower issue that they can definitely man up.
Councillor Taylor and then Deputy Mayor Brosnan.
So just to bring a couple of points and to Councillor Wright, the Rotary Pathway Trust is still in existence. It still has considerable money and is already offered to supplement a grant that the council has received, and I think they have offered up 180,000 to complete one of the projects where there wasn't quite sufficient funds granted. The other thing just to note is that I think a weekend or so ago, 50 Rotarians assisted planting on West Shore, and they have also got funds donated and will be doing further planting at the southern end of Dolbell Reserve and also at the Kirst Jensen Memorial area. So you're all correct. They've got money, they've got manpower, and they've got the willingness to assist. So I think we should be tapping into that resource before they spend their money on something else.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I was just a question. I understand that the group here were also successful in some of our recovery funding, the Green Te Puawaitanga funding. Is that correct?
Sorry, I wasn't listening properly.
It's all right. I just understand that they were successful in some funding for planting through Te Puawaitanga. this group?
Through the Mayor, that's correct. I'm just not sure exactly how much was
Yeah.
allocated.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I suppose I have a slightly different view to John on this space. So I acknowledge that obviously it has a key infrastructure component to it, and that was why it was originally there. But I think times have moved on a little bit, and I think as well as having a primary infrastructure focused spaces and these green spaces for us, also have, you know, an equally important kind of biodiversity, community, green space, recreational value to the city. And so I'm really keen, just listening to the conversation, I'm really keen for council to partner with the Paramai Residents Association to assist them in realising their vision for this project. And I think that could be through compartmentalising the parts of the project and connecting them with funding and resourcing both inside and outside of council, as I think some very good points from councillors have been made. And also that I think council assist them in refining the project to kind of marry up or collate the infrastructure needs of the city with the biodiversity outcomes and recreational outcomes they're seeking. So I think there's no point probably them doing it in isolation from the discussions with our staff around what the city needs in that space as well. But I definitely think there's a middle ground there. So I just want to probably have a slightly different view that infrastructure is not only the top of mind in this space, but also that we've got some really cool other outcomes we can achieve in our green spaces.
Councillor Tapani, then Councillor Brown.
First of all, support the comments from the Deputy Mayor. This is a great opportunity for collaboration. But also hearing the concerns from John around our current staffing and the current work demands upon our staff. So I just wondered if there was the opportunity, John, if we are able to get confidence through the initial feasibility studies and analysis, if we were able to achieve confidence that we could deliver this project without compromising the function of the cross-country drain, or even by enhancing the function of the cross-country drain, is this a project that could be outsourced, or does it need to be delivered fully in-house? And this is a question around our current staffing and their commitment, or is this really a question around staffing, and do we need to provide the ability to increase our staffing in this space? Just a simple question.
Through you, Madam Mayor, another simple question. I'll break that into a couple of components. My point about the nature of the waterways is that their primary function is to convey stormwater to prevent flooding, and we need to be very careful not to compromise that ability, otherwise we will cause flooding. I agree that there are great opportunities for biodiversity improvements in those spaces, and the key part of analysis that we need to do is to determine what extent of that can occur without compromising the primary function of those waterways. So I'm not saying that can't happen. It may not be that not all of it can happen, or what have you. So part of the consideration also is it about aesthetics, biodiversity, or is there a stormwater quality improvement opportunity in that space as well? And I guess that's the key when it comes to assessing capacity within that waterway environment. I think the key resource component here is in that planning and the planning and preparation phase, and then undertaking all that assessment. We have our network model, and that is with our consultant, and at some point they will be able to make that assessment. But at the moment we're still looking to calibrate that model, and we're undertaking assessments on other parts of our network that are informing key parts of our program, particularly long-term plan and particularly district plan and Te Awa structure plan. So I don't think that can be outsourced. At the point where it becomes a viable project, either it's in its entirety or in part, compartmentalised or broken down into phases, we don't need to be involved in that work, provided it makes this, what is achievable within those considerations, I guess. So at that point, yes, our involvement can be reduced. But right up front, we kind of have a priority of work that means that we can't get to that assessment straight away. And I don't think just bringing on another person is going to solve that problem.
Thank you. So, based on those constraints, supplementary, do we have understanding that the list of priorities for council is large? Do we have an estimated timeframe that I might be able to, or we might be able to take back to the Residents Association that might be realistic so that they can pace their energy and their enthusiasm to fit the scheduled work?
Through you, Madam Mayor, not off the top of my head.
Ka pai.
Or in my
Thank you.
fingertips.
Ka pai.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Just noting the necessity for a lot of strategic work to go on before there's planting along the edge of the waterways and the staff capacity. I was wondering if it might be worth spending, half a day or a few hours looking at their overall plan and identifying any areas within their plan that could be planted that aren't necessarily strategic. So if there's anything, because I'm just thinking if they've submitted for many years on this, it would be quite nice for them to get some runs on the board, even if it's in pockets, rather than the big overall picture.
Just a question for John. Sorry, excuse me.
Let John answer that one first and then you can.
I thought it was a statement, sorry. John was hesitating.
Sorry about that, John. Yeah, there was a pause, wasn't there? Jump into those gaps. Look, there's a piece of work we could do, absolutely. It involves more than one person. Our operational arm, our asset management arm, and probably our environmental arm at some point. And so that's multiple people for a number of hours. We could probably find some time in there somewhere to have a quick look at that. But at the point where, that will be a very high level view of that, there's some risk in that too, of work carrying on that then may later be impacted by our core function. So yeah, we could do that. Couldn't tell you when.
Councillor Mawson.
Thank you. Excuse me. John, just how often does the drain get used? I mean, is it always in operation, or is it a drain that gets used if the overflow of the other drain is too much?
Through you, Madam Mayor, every time it rains. And it's not a matter of overflow from other drains. Although part of our strategic review of our open waterway network and our reticulated network will be looking at the more strategic at a high level available capacity and where we might make changes. It's a big part of our master plan work.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Cran.
I'm assuming you're going to probably...
Yeah, I'm going to sort of try and wrap this up with a few points. So I'm going to make the recommendation that we do take the time to allocate a resource just to sit down with Putamai Residents Association to discuss the project and provide them with some direction and advice to the rotary pathways and what the opportunities are there, and that at this stage we essentially just have input from the perspective of ensuring that our stormwater network is not impacted by any of the work that is done, but that certainly we guide Putamai Residents Association to the other resources that they can be tapping into to do some of the projects that sit within the overall proposal. And I'm sure that can be put more eloquently. Getting very late in the day.
I don't know if this helps, Your Worship, but I do know that the Putamai Residents Association have been working on this for about a year and a half, and which is why I asked the question around who in the community is participating in the conversation, and they have approached both iWays, Bupa, and any party that they can think of that might be able to express an interest in this field, and they've really kicked off some relationships, and so it wouldn't be difficult for us to work with the PRA to progress an existing relationship. So this wouldn't, they may have already done that. So,
In terms of the Rotary Pathways Trust?
oh, no, they were doing the iCycle. They went through
Yeah.
iWay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Does there need to be anything further added to that?
Oh, doesn't
or-
Also, the component around assisting and refining the project
yeah.
from our infrastructure perspective.
Yeah. Or providing advice and input
To the concept.
to the concept, yeah. To protect our infrastructure. Okay, I will move on. I am going to suggest we just do one more because I know my energy levels are flagging, so I'm sure everybody else's are as well. I think the next one's going to be relatively quick, so we may finish at 5 o'clock. So the Ngātoi funding request for $10,000. Now there is an amended, which I'm not sure if everybody got a copy of this, because in your agenda there was the incorrect description put in there. So this is to contribute to administration and communication costs, $10,000 request for this current year. And they will, as discussed when they submitted yesterday, be coming to us later this year to discuss entering into a more permanent service level agreement to deliver on a longer term strategy. So I'll hand over to Councillor Wright, who's champing at the bit too.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to give them the $10,000 that they've requested and ask them to front up for a service agreement in the future. But that $10,000 should come with a bit of a hook around getting this council up to speed with the regional arts and culture strategy that was developed, and getting us to look at it and make sure that it aligns with our own strategies and visions for our city. That they work with us with that document and make sure that we can align with it moving forward. And then if we can buy into it, then that's when we look at a service agreement moving forward into the future. They will also need to do some work around, because it's a high level strategy, they'll need to do some work around providing us during the LTP process with their strategy for delivering their plan for delivering on that regional strategy to us and to Hastings at that time.
Perfect. Great summary.
Okay.
Yeah, and to come from the arts policy allocation. Any further comments or anything needed to be added to that? As mentioned yesterday, I have already discussed with Dick Grant that we would like to have them come and present to us on the current strategy, and exactly as Councillor Wright outlined, to ensure it does align with us, and then be able to move forward with them to have some actions built around that at a localised level.
Yeah. So the only thing that's missing from that is that they need to work with us to make sure that the strategy aligns with our own policies and city vision as well. So that's a bit of work. That means they'll probably have to come and meet with the council, take us through that strategy, and then make sure that we're comfortable with it moving forward.
Question. How do you put measures into something like this? How would you have give us results, councillors results, or
And that would be part of the discussion you have when we meet with them and drill down to that greater level of detail around what the deliverables are. So first of all, we actually need to be socialised or introduced to what the current strategy is that has been developed through the Hastings District Council, but with significant input from Napier stakeholders within the arts and culture sector. So I think once we've had an understanding of that and satisfied ourselves that it aligns with the direction that we want to head in our own city vision, then we can start drilling down into that detail about what deliverables we would expect and how we would measure that.
Yeah. All service agreements have outcomes and KPIs attached to them and expectations of what they'll deliver, and they have to report on those annually to the council.
Councillor Brown. It might help with the thinking. I went to one of their events a couple of weeks ago, and the sort of work that they do is, so they've got some Hauipa artists who are really good at making art, and they help give them the skills around how they turn their art into a business and how they can advertise and monetize the work that they do. So there could be some deliverables around number of businesses started or something like that.
Thank you, Councillor Brown.
Can I just add support to Councillor Wright's comments? In my term on the creative communities, we had a number of applications coming through from our arts sector around website development, communication across the sector, coordination between Hastings and Napier. These are all expressions that are coming from the artists themselves, and some of them are trying to build those solutions on their own right through community grants. So this work is another step towards a regional focus for our creative arts, and it's a welcome one. So those are the only comments I just wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tapani. So that, I think, is a good place to stop for today. Tomorrow morning we'll reconvene at 9 a.m. and we have 4 more funding requests to consider. And then we will move on to the other submissions that came through that didn't actually sit within the specific items that were included in the consultation document, which Deputy Mayor Brosnan has been very, very diligently compiling for us today.
Through you, Your Worship, I was going to ask councillors if it would be helpful. So I have a list of other matters that have been raised in submissions. If you would like, I could email those out so that ahead of tomorrow you've had a look over the concepts to discuss.
Lovely.
Will do.
That would be fantastic. Thank you very much.
And any extras, let me know via return email and I'll send a complete list to staff in the morning if I've missed anything, which is completely possible.
Thank you, everybody. It's been a long day. Thank you to staff. Thank you to our sign language. It's been a long day for you too. We'll see you tomorrow. And thank you to councillors.